Welcome to the Making of Man. My name is Matthew Rodriguez. In this episode, I talk with Evan Myers about vitalism and creating Catholic communities. We're going to discuss one Catholic community in particular, but I think you'll be able to take away a lot of good resources and ideas to be able to build a stronger Catholic community wherever you are. Enjoy. Welcome, Evan. Thank you for coming on to the Making of Man.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So I thought that we could start today, as we just kind of talked about, with some ideological discussions, and then we can go into more of the practical discussions. And to start and talk about some of the ideological themes that are going on in men's circles, the manosphere, as it's been called. You had written an article that addressed some of these things, that was specifically on a book by Deneen, but it's called Deneen's Assault on Vitalism. And in it, you kind of discussed some of these ideological themes. And so I wanted to kind of start there and see if we could explain this for anyone that's listening and see, kind of call forth, some of the things that they might be seeing in our popular culture today and give a name to them. And so in it, you kind of define three general camps, where there's the Bronze Age mindset that kind of takes root from Nietzsche and from our pagan past, the Greek and Roman classical thought. There's the current liberal mindset, that's like classical liberalism. And then there is whatever we want to call the third option, whether it's post-liberal, integralist. There are a lot of names for it, and maybe we could, find one to use for today's discussion that is kind of coming forth as more the suggested option for men grounded in Catholic thought. And so I thought that we could just start there and discuss those three, and then we can move on to some practicalities.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having me on. As a starting point, I think the description of the three camps that you offered is as good as any. Like any sort of framework, there are shortcomings to this way of approaching the subject. But I think in effect you have I'll start off with the sort of classically liberal option, which I think for most Christians, or really for most people until somewhat recently, we sort of viewed as the only option. I mean, one of the reasons this sort of question or debate, or however you want to put it, is interesting is because I think there was sort of a consensus for a long time about what was appropriate in politics, and to its credit, the sort of classically liberal worldview maintained order and maintained a healthy society, or somewhat healthy society, for a long time. I mean, of course, that has strengths and weaknesses. I'm not saying that it's the end all be all, but it certainly deserves, I think, more credit than most people in these other two camps are willing to give it, especially among young men. I think we too easily dismiss some of the benefits of the current system. Now, I'm not saying the current system is like particularly favorable to us or something like that, or to your flourishing as a guy, but if you want to, I think a really important part of being a man is gratitude, and certainly part of being a Christian is gratitude, and so you have to begin with sort of gratitude for things as they are, and making the most of that. So if you start there, and then you've had, I would say, you have these two separate camps that I think are actually more in opposition. Sort of, they're both in opposition to each other and to the sort of liberal camp. And then I think the question becomes about the relationship between these two things. Like, what does this triangle really look like? But you have, on the one hand, you have sort of Bronze Age mindset, or people you could call the vitalists, and even normal people. This is sort of, you could even say this is more like sort of a barstool conservative sort of position, where it's like, why get married? Why not have multiple partners? Why not, have sex before marriage or any of these things? What's the issue? The system isn't set up for our success. We have to go and sort of go our own way and carve out our own success. And this too, I think, gets dismissed far too easily. There really is something to it. I think unless we're willing to contend with it as such, then we're going to miss something important about why it's so attractive. And then finally, you have the sort of post-liberal faction, which I think is really quite small in the broader public, but among a certain type of Catholic intellectual class, not just Catholic, Protestant too, Christian intellectual class, and of course there's some atheists that are post-liberals as well. But among a certain group of people, this is particularly powerful and well-educated group of people. Really, this has become very popular, which is this idea that we have to move beyond liberalism. That liberalism, and this all got kicked off as you sort of reference from book Patrick Deneen wrote. Not the most recent one called Regime Change, but the original one called Why Liberalism Failed. And that book sort of laid out, it's not that these themes hadn't been discussed before, but they really crystallized and captured a certain moment and captured the intellectual imagination of a certain group of people, that, hey, liberalism has built in itself a decline. And it basically is a sort of vampire that relies on the resources of a greater civilization. And those resources are running short. And ever since then, people have sort of been dealing with these questions since that book. I remember when I was in undergrad, that book had come out. We read it in a sort of semester-long course we did on the crisis of liberalism. And that crisis is, maybe been going for a while, but certainly people have been talking about it for almost 10 years now, maybe a little less than that, but approaching that. So it's still an open question, and there's lots of different opinions. And all of this, of course, can be talked about in purely political terms or ideological terms, but what its relationship is to masculinity is, become an even more pressing question in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that there are kind of fault lines that these three philosophies fall on. I think that the Bronze Age mindset is really seductive because it doesn't put on men the limitations that maybe the Christian mindset would, right? As you mentioned, there are a lot of attacks on traditional Christian values that we're now seeing come from men that we haven't seen come from that side before. I saw a comment once that, a lot of these things we've seen kind of come from feminism, like the attack on marriage, the attack on, all these things, but we haven't really seen them come from men before. Now we are, where men are saying that marriage is a bad deal, all these things. And this kind of trickles down to a much more diluted version, but just like the, self-focus kind of rise and grind. Like it's just kind of like all on you. Like the implied end goal is that if you do that, then you will become one of these exceptional men.
Yeah.
So I thought that was, an interesting kind of point.
You're right. It's worth dwelling on the appeal. It really is. Just as a matter of course, like it the way I think it works, quite simply, I felt the appeal myself, was like, okay, look, like you can either go and try to sort of make your life work in the current system, or you can sort of go your own way, bet on yourself. That's always attractive. Especially if you're confident, you're ambitious, bet on myself. I'm gonna work my butt off. I'm gonna, do my own thing, start my own business, make myself successful. All good things, all virtuous things, actually. And then, you apply the same framework to women, and it's like, okay, well, I'm going to, it's sort of conquest mentality. Like, I'm going to see how many women I can sort of be with. I'm going to, pursue these women. And again, there's even, in my view, I think there's something that's not inherently wrong with that, in the sense, obviously I don't think that's how you should live your life. but I understand the appeal insofar as like, look, women are beautiful. Like, I'm going to go see how many I can be with. Like, I'm going to go, this is a good thing. I'm going to go have more of it. I'm not going to limit myself artificially. I'm not going to have some constraints placed upon my will that are unnecessary. Like, I'm going to go and do what I want to do. And what my natural instincts, or at least the way I, think I understand my natural instincts, encourage me to do, not compel, but, every ounce of my, my being is calling out for me to go be great, to go achieve something truly great. And why not? That's incredibly appealing to me. Like, I want to be great. I don't want to just be, like mediocre. And I think mediocrity is something that we don't talk about enough. Like, so much of our society, I think, is just mediocre. Like the entertainment, mediocre. Like even porn, mediocre. Like a lot of times, like these guys in Bronze Age mindset and stuff are super anti-porn because they're like, "What are you doing?" Like, that is so lame. It is lame. They're totally right. And yeah, I mean, it's just this appeal to greatness that men resonate to and should. And I've joked before, like if I had a son, I have a daughter. If I had a son, maybe I should think about it if I have a son-in-law, since it's more relevant to me at this point. But if I have a son, yeah, and he was like either gonna be like just some absolute dweeb, like and just not, just kind of muddle around and just be unfaithful, but in like, I'd rather him be great. Like I think that I feel pretty confident, even when it comes to like converting people. Like I feel way better about like guys that are searching that stuff out, and pushing the boundaries of like what's acceptable than I do about guys who are just sort of lukewarm. Like, I mean, you credit to the Bronze Age mindset. Those guys are not lukewarm. Like, and yeah, I mean, I don't. So I have hope for them. I do, genuinely, and I think we should see. We shouldn't just see purely bad things and that impulse and that instinct that those guys are pursuing.
Yeah. One, maybe to bulwark against that, you mentioned in the beginning some of the things to be grateful for about our current system. And that actually really interests me. Could you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that I when I think of that, I especially think in political terms. Like, we're not. Well, there's both something. There's something to be appreciated about the stability that we currently have, and then I also think there's something that's really, oppressive about sort of what to do with it. So what I mean is, like, I think in when we think seriously about where things are, we should be grateful for peace. We should be grateful for, I mean, insofar as there is a certain amount of peace. Of course, millions of babies are killed every year, and it's just done in more technological ways, But yeah, I mean, look, I had a good childhood. My parents gave me a good home. I grew up in a loving family. Prosperity was incredible. I mean, both my parents were public school teachers, and my dad passed away when I was a little kid. So I basically grew up with a single mom, public school teacher, and I had everything I could ever want, And so, of course, it's not true for everyone. Not even true for everyone in the United States, but it's true for a lot of us, and it's we should be grateful for that. I met my wife when I was maybe I'm the exception here. I met my wife when I was 20 years old, and I'm super grateful for that. I have a daughter who I love, and I'm grateful for her. So I mean, I think too often, especially in these ideological spaces, we get so carried away talking about this is all wrong and this is all bad, and it's just like, hey man, relax. This, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was, the society that you live in, just corrupted overnight. So, I feel like we get way too carried away, saying everything is bad and rotten before we even begin to appreciate the things that we have. And not only does that make us like ineffective, because you can't really effectively improve things if you're not willing to contend with where things are, including being grateful for the things that are good. Yeah, but so it makes us ineffective, and it also just makes us dumb. Really, I mean, it makes you. I don't know how to become virtuous or how to become happy, which is what I want. I mean, I want to live the good life. I don't know how to do that without beginning with gratitude. And I don't know how to be Catholic without beginning with gratitude. So I think that's a place to start. And I don't think that forecloses you being a post-liberal, or even I don't even necessarily think that forecloses you being a Bronze Age mindset kind of person. I mean, I'm not saying that's like the whole answer. I'm just saying that it's good to begin with gratitude. I think too often we don't. So anyhow, yeah.
Yeah. One, we do have the flexibility to kind of put different things into practice, right? Which I think that we could be grateful for.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm interested in hearing more about is the community where you currently live, where it seems like there is a pretty strong Catholic culture.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if you'd label that ideologically, post-liberal, or just kind of a Catholic culture inside a classical liberal political structure. But the fact that that community can do that is cool,
Yeah, no, I mean, you're totally right. You're totally right. And that's a great example of what I'm talking about is, again, and this is not me saying there's no issues. It's just saying it is still possible to achieve a lot of elements of the good life. Maybe not so much in theory, but in practice, I certainly feel as if I'm getting to benefit from a lot of these things. So I live in this place called Hyattsville, Maryland. It's about 20 minutes outside of DC. So I work near the Capitol. And yeah, so I live out there. It's not a bad commute. And it wasn't always what it is now. But about 20 years ago, maybe a little less, and people have been written about Hyattsville before. You can look up articles and whatnot. But about 20 years ago, a few Catholic families decided to move there. I think there are probably Catholic families there already. But, some people, there were low property values, and people said, hey, we're going to, buy homes here. It was a pretty rough area at the time, from what I understand. But they said, we're going to buy homes here. We're going to raise our families here. And we're just going to really try to intentionally build Catholic community. And they have been doing that ever since. And now, I mean, I'm really guessing, but I think it's probably a few hundred families. And of course, in a normal place, that means a few hundred families might mean 1,000 people, accounting for about 3 or 4 people a family. I think in Hyattsville, so that probably means closer to 2,000 people, 2,400 people. I mean, I genuinely think most people have 4, 5, 6 kids. It's just pretty normal. And I wouldn't describe it as a post-liberal community at all. Now there are people that are sort of leaders and whatever you could call like intellectual post-liberalism that live in Hyattsville. I know some of them. There are also people that you would definitely put in a sort of classical liberal camp that live in Hyattsville. There's even people that you would put on some sort of like on a political spectrum, just sort of left-right. It's not as simple as, I think people look at a place like Hyattsville and they assume everyone is in a conservative, like traditional Catholic, post-liberal, integralist, and you're trying to construct some sort of like, commune. It's like, okay, that's not how that works at all. I've never heard of anything like that. That is certainly not where I live. People are, I don't think anyone's like pro-abortion or anything, but like, you have people from the left to the right, in terms of sort of whatever you would call like being left in a Catholic circle to, just being like a full-on, conservative movement kind of person. And then within the spectrum of the right, you have people on the new right and people that you could say are more a part of establishment, right wing, whatever. The point is, it's just a diverse group of people politically and even religiously. It's a diverse group of people. I mean, like the main parish in Hyattsville is St. Jerome's. My wife works at the school, is attached to the parish, and that's just a normal like traditional, not a traditional mass in the sense of like a Latin mass, but it's just a normal Novus Ordo mass. I wouldn't really say there's too much special about it. other than the fact there's a lot of kids there. But you have other people that go to the Franciscan monastery for Latin Mass. I mean, so there are people that go to Latin Mass. There are people that go to the Novus Ordo. Point is, it's like what makes Hyattsville is not the devotion to post-liberal forms of thought. It's not the devotion to the traditional Latin Mass, although we have people that are devoted to both those things. Honestly, I really think what it is a devotion to children. Just to marriage and children is a place for children. Overwhelmingly, like people have children. It's normal to have kids. Not that you couldn't have children and live there. I have friends that don't have kids that live near us and I think really enjoy the community. But it really is a place, a great place to raise kids. And that's not because we control the city council. It's not because we have implemented all these laws. It's because people just really go out of their way to make it a friendly environment. So it's one big thing is it's walkable. I'll give an example that will illustrate more like what I'm talking about. People ask me, like I have friends that are moving to DC or something. They'll say, hey, where should I live? Where should me and my wife move? Or, we want to have kids, or my wife's pregnant. Where should we live? And I'm like, oh, you should live in Hyattsville. And they're like, okay, well, should I come to Mass on a Sunday? Will that help me get a sense of like how special it is? And I'm like, not really. Like, I mean, you shouldn't not do that. I mean, it's a good Mass. It's fine. But I say, if you want to come see what Hyattsville is all about, you should probably come to just anywhere kind of in this 1 mile radius or whatever at like 3:00 on a school day, and just like watch these kids leave the school and just walk out on their own with no parental supervision a lot of times, or very limited sort of parental supervision, and just walk around their community and feel safe and be talking about like all kinds of amazing things. Kids are just always incredible for that sort of thing, but just well-formed kids, not on their phones, just like walking around their neighborhood talking. And it's weird, I think, for some people to have to realize like that's sort of a novel and unique and rare thing, but it really is. I mean, it really is. It struck me one time, before I moved there, I was just I was visiting some friends, and I was like, I've never seen anything like this since I was a child. Like I've never experienced community like this. Another example I give people a lot of times is there's this group of parents within Hyattsville. I've written about this. It's called the Postman Pledge. So it's these parents that have basically just pledged to raise their children with a certain relationship to technology, basically, seriously limiting the use of technology in general and especially in the home, both for themselves, but especially for their children. And to sort of compensate or to, they understand that kids' community today so often is online. And so to sort of fill in for that, because if you keep kids from being online, but you don't teach them to love something else, as soon as they're able to get online, they're going to be even hungrier for it than they would otherwise. So, you have to teach them to love something good and real. So they have like all these community dances, and they put on all these events, these festivals and stuff, maybe once, twice a month sort of thing. But they're really special. I say, come to one of those, like come and see that. Come to a wedding in Hyattsville and see like, the only wedding I've ever been to with more kids than adults, like, was a Hyattsville wedding. It's just remarkable. Like, come watch the kids play soccer. It's just the whole community is built around children, and I think actually just a willingness to put kids first makes so much of these other discussions sort of irrelevant or not irrelevant. It's not like it don't matter. It's just when it comes to day-to-day practical life, I don't really care if you think that, Bronze Age mindset. I don't think anyone in Hyattsville has a Bronze Age mindset, although we probably have more kids than all those people. But like, I don't care if you really think that John Locke was like an evil person or not. Like, I care if you are gonna be a good example for my kids, and that's I think that's what makes it a unique place, is just the devotion to children.
Yeah. Well, and that maybe ties into something else that you brought up in your article that I thought was really interesting, where this is more on the classical liberalism front and how it views the elite versus the, let's say common strata of people.
Yeah.
That where in more of a kind of medieval society, you had the noblesse oblige, where it was, the nobles were aware of their privilege, trying to bring up the common man, or they were focused on the common man at least.
Yeah.
Today, I thought it was an interesting insight where you said that the current elite doesn't really talk about like the common experience. It's more so like
Yeah.
the implicit assumption is everybody should become elite in whatever way that they can.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, that's where you get all the 22-year-olds that are drop shipping and doing all this stuff. And I totally see that is everyone's trying to get rich quick. They're trying to become elite quick. And I wonder if that's almost a tie-in of, by doing the, drop shipping route, you're not really thinking about the legacy that you're building or things along those lines, maybe as concretely as you might be thinking about it if you're truly trying to build a society that's like for kids, kind of like you've said, even outside of maybe some of the greater ideological shifts that are going on. Like it's kind of besides the point.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I should say about Hyattsville, like a bunch of people that live there work in Washington, D.C., politics or sort of elite industries. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And so it's, I think I try to be careful when I use terms like elite because it's like, okay, what do we mean by that? But, if what we mean is the people that sort of, the people and norms that sort of rule society, no, I don't think Hyattsville is elite in that sense. Those people would live in Northwest DC, not Northeast DC. Huge distinction, but not always entirely accurate. But certainly is an important distinction to be made. Yeah, but to your point about young men and the way they sort of think about their lives and careers and whatnot. I think if you I think we have an economy and a society that's really structured around a sort of, it's almost a lottery. Now, I don't mean to say there's no merit to it, but there really isn't. No, there is a certain amount of merit, but the way it seems to work is certainly psychologically. I think the way young men think about it is like, if I don't hit certain milestones, like I will be destitute. Like I will not find a wife. Like I will not have kids. Like I will not achieve the things I want to achieve. And that actually, this is really the dynamic I was trying to describe in the article that we've referenced several times, is like in a society where the elite doesn't really know how to improve the lives or cultivate the lives of normal people, other than to make them into more elites. Well, what you're going to lose is and what we have lost, I think, in many ways, is just it's going to make everyone into competitors with each other, and sort of and you can see this driving the sort of new vitalist movement is like, look, like what's the worst thing you can possibly be in and to a vitalist? I mean, you asked them, I think, probably the term, and we're not cussing, so I hope this doesn't, break those rules, but it's a cuckold. You don't want to be a cuckold. You don't want another man to sleep with your wife. And it's like, well, why is that? I mean, obviously that's bad. Like that would be awful. But the reason it's sort of the symbol of like everything that you don't want to be. Of course, these guys don't really have wives anyway. So, like you don't want another man to sleep with your girl, I guess. Like, but why is that so bad? It's because, I mean, it's just symbolic of like how competitive everything is. It's like, these are my possessions. This is like, even women at this point, right? Like, this is my woman. Like, she belongs to me. Like, how many can I amass? Like, and if I can take your woman, then like, oh yeah, therefore, like I'm greater than you are. Like, which is, again, within that framework of like competitiveness makes perfect sense. Like, I basically think vitalism is a natural and logical response to the liberal society that we have now. Like in many ways, I think that vitalism actually makes a whole lot of sense. If you're operating in the current framework. So I think what guys have to do and children sort of do this implicitly to you. Marriage, like real marriage, like serious marriage, does this sort of implicitly to you. It changes the framework that you're operating in, to where you're not simply thinking of yourself as sort of an atomized individual that has to amass as many possessions as possible, or has to get a degree, or you had to do all these things in order to survive and thrive and become elite. You start thinking about others. You start the possibility of community, the possibility of neighborliness, the possibility of friendship, opens itself up. And so, yeah, I mean, I think basically the challenge for a lot of young men is to be able to overcome that framework that they're in, realize there is another way to live. Not that it doesn't come without consequences, it does. But just there's another way to operate. And, the more that I have explored that part of my life, the more that I have, the longer I've been married, now that I have a daughter, the more I'm able to sort of do those things. And also that, and see that that's a call to greatness itself. I want to shout out a piece. It's actually very different than my piece. It's not really so much about ideology or whatnot, but it's by one of my neighbors named Alexi Sargent, who I really admire. He and his wife are both phenomenal writers, and it's called Men of Fidelity. It's basically just making the case that actually fidelity is sort of just like basic fidelity to your wife and to your family. It's like a call to greatness in a lot of ways. He has this, he closes the article in saying, he quotes Chesterton, as we all should, and he says, he is wandering in a hungry search for Chesterton. He says this, Chesterton speaks sorrowfully of the philandering man. He is wandering in a hungry search for a certain exhilaration which he can only have when he has the courage to cease from wondering. The day-to-day and moment-by-moment work of fidelity may not seem to be the stuff of exhilaration, but the truth is we are committing to an extraordinary thing, to love the infinite during our finite existence by forging a bond we can never break, to help root this reality in the imagination of a new generation of men. It is worth seeking out and praising those with the courage to cease from wondering. And I really think that captures a lot of what makes my community really great. There's just a high level of fidelity to your family, and it just when you stop wondering in Chesterton's words, right? If you're able to stop wondering, and another way we could say that in the sort of framework that we were just talking about, Matthew, is you're able to stop viewing yourself as an inherent competitor with like every other man, because the things that really matter are not things that can be sort of stolen from you. Then I think that you can live on a really different plane. But yeah, that's I'll stop rambling. But yeah, that's sort of where your comment made me go.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think even that last point is really important, that the goods, if you want to say it with that term, that I would recommend, or that maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that, we would recommend that men go towards are not goods that can be stolen. I think that's a very interesting way to frame it, is, those goods are virtue. They're kind of built into your character. And of course, like you said, if you are married, then you have a responsibility to protect your wife and kids.
Yes, of course.
It's not like everything else is up for grabs, but I do appreciate kind of just that thought process. So I was just curious, in that, to make it more tangible, if you could go into a little bit more of that. It was the Postman's Pledge. Was that what it was called?
Yeah, Postman Pledge. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, maybe people have heard of Wait Till 8. That's a similar kind of idea, where you get a group of parents that are willing to, keep technology from their kids until the 8th grade. But this might be a little bit even more of an extreme version, and it seems to have built a good community in where you live. And so I was wondering if you could share that with some of the listeners.
Yeah, I'll happily talk about that, because I really think this is an idea that deserves to spread and be adopted by more people. And as far as I'm aware, I mean, I work every day. I'd like to put more regulations on big tech. I mean, I'd like to protect our children, more. I in my job, and in the political world, I really push for a lot of these things. But, with the way things are now, I think these sort of community, you can't really do it on your own as a family, because if your kids interact with other kids, which hopefully they do, you have to have, some sort of community support here. And so these sort of pledges are useful. The wait till 8 thing, I actually, when you said that, I first thought of the bill in Florida, where it was like, you have to wait till they're like 8 years old to teach them about all these things in schools and whatnot. But okay, so wait until 8th grade to give your kid a phone. I mean, yeah, I would say that's sort of the bare minimum. And I'm really hopeful, Matthew, that men in our generation. So I'm 25. I grew up. I had sort of a flip phone and then like a sort of slider phone until about 7th or 8th grade, and then I got the smartphone. But I really feel like we were sort of the guinea pigs for so much of this technology.
Yeah.
And I hope that men in our generation, the ones that come after us, that do have children, that do have families, will know better than to allow their kids unfettered access to this just absolute addictive just these addictive technologies that are just horrible for everyone. But I think especially for young men, I mean, that's my experience. They're just as bad for women. But yeah, they do some really destructive things to men. So yeah, the Postman Pledge is something that we're going to do with our kids. It's a local thing in Hyattsville. It's actually based off the writings of an author named Neil Postman, who is a technology theorist, a professor at NYU. He's actually a secular Jewish humanist. But the dude was right about technology, man. Let me tell you, he was predicting stuff in like the 1980s and 1990s that has really, really just come. He's very insightful, and just really brilliant about how we need to think about technology. And in practice, the way this works is basically, now the rules are not sort of. I don't mean to make it seem as if this is a really, really strict group. I mean, no one's enforcing rules. It's just a sort of expectation that your kids will not have a phone, through 8th grade at least, and then probably beyond that. And certainly not a smartphone. I mean, I don't plan to ever get my kids a smartphone. And really that, I mean, and one thing that I'm still working on, and I think, people our age need to think about as we raise children, is like, well, if you want them to not have a smartphone, well, you should consider getting rid of yours. Mm-hmm. So I have an iPhone right now, but really seriously considering getting rid of it, and probably will. Easier said than done, though, of course. And yeah, so and then also just limited technology in the home, like if any. I mean, I think most of these people don't have any screens in their house. The best story I have, and this is like one of my favorite stories. This is a story about like why you should live in Hyattsville. I legitimately heard about these kids who were like probably 7, 8, 10. A few of them, these brothers and sisters, that it was raining one day, and their parents were like, I think it was their like granddad's birthday or something, and they said, "Hey, do you want to call your grandpa?" And they said, "Oh, we can't. We can't do that today." And they were like, the parents like, "What? Why not? Like, why couldn't you just call your grandpa?" And they're like, "Oh, well, we can't go outside." And they're like, "What does that have to do with calling your grandpa?" Well, they'd only ever seen their parents use the phones outside of the house. Like every time mom or dad had to use a phone, they stepped outside of the house to go and use their phone. And let me, as a father, man, that is more and more logical. It just makes sense to me, because I see, already, like I have a 4 or 5 month old daughter, who, if you even have a screen anywhere around her, it's just like a gravitational pull. It's actually insane. So you have to be, I think, really careful. I was just texting my wife earlier today, actually, about, hey, what are additional things we can do to be more careful about like the way that we, interact around technology with our kids, because you want to not only, limit them, but also role model what it looks like. I think a lot of parents got into this mentality, this happened even for our generation, right? It's like, look, we're going to have phones. We're going to do, we're going to do what adults can do on phones. And then obviously kids, we're just going to limit their use. So we're either going to like make the device like a safe device for them, or we're going to put in filters and stuff. It's like, that's not enough. Like, you actually have to model good behavior. That's like, look, it's like if you, eat a bunch of, candy. You just have candy around your house, or you have soda around your house, and you tell your kids they can never eat it. It's like, well, eventually you're either going to have fights with your kids all the time, or you're just going to give in. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So, I think that's what the Postman Pledge sort of calls on parents to do, is not merely, limit technology for their kids, but also to model good behavior in the way they have a relationship with technology, which I think is a really important and under-discussed aspect of this particular question. And then finally, as I was sort of hinting at before, we have to acknowledge that today, most children, certainly most teenagers, their community exists online. I mean, that's where they live. It's a place. People don't always think of technology as a place, but it's really a place where they live and spend their lives. So if you're going to take that away, if you're going to, deprive, I don't really think it's a deprivation, but if you're going to take that away from children, we have to give them something real. Like, you have to give them something tangible to hold on to. So yes, like we regularly organize, dances. That's one of my favorite things. We'll do like Scottish dances. I don't know why people always ask me like, why Scottish dances? And I think it's because they're like really easy to learn, because someone can just like sort of shout them out. It's not like a tango or something that's like all complex. So like, you'll have, if you're a kid, you can learn how to do a line dance, so we'll do like, big Scottish dances at the parish hall. Or, like we'll like have a day, kind of like a field day basically. And every time they have an event, it's always a potluck. So I think the next one coming up is an English country dance, which should be really fun. And yeah, it's just like that kind of thing organically happened in Hyattsville because of the people that live there and the focus on children. And also I should say, and I haven't said this yet, but like the number of stay-at-home moms or I don't even use that term. They prefer the term, rightfully so, homemaker, or the number of women that choose to work in a domestic capacity. I think that's the best way to put it. Is astounding. I mean, it's not everybody. I know mothers, really good mothers in Hyattsville that work. I'm friends with them, but I also know a lot that don't. And I think a lot of the credit for how good the community is goes to them. And also their husbands that are, providing and making sacrifices financially and otherwise, in order to, economically, make that work, financially make that work. But yeah, I really think it's very hard to have a community, like a real community, if you don't have a, certain number of people whose entire life sort of revolves around making your community a rich, vibrant place for kids. And for married couples, just for families in general. And we have a whole lot of women in Hyattsville that do that. And it's really awesome. And even the women who do work, do that too. But it's just, I think, they would also say like the ability of, those homemakers, you can call them community makers too, if you want. I mean, people that pour into the community because they have the time to do so. Because they're not working. They're not working in a sort of job, like a desk job, like the one I'm in. Well, it's a way cooler job, really, that they get to do. So that too is like why stuff like this is possible. I mean, the lady who founded the Postman Pledge, was a PhD political philosophy, from Villanova, absolutely brilliant woman who, decided that she wanted to stay at home and raise her children. And this is one of the things that, she started, and it's really amazing. So yeah, I hope more people will do that. It's not hard actually, and it's really fun once you have a kind of critical mass of people that want to join in on something like that.
Well, and I think that an added element that you also have when everybody is giving up technology for, the
community.
And just giving up the majority of their use of technology, really, is you have the added kind of, I'll say like pressure of boredom, which I think is really important, where if you're never bored, if you're always able to look at something on your phone, then you're not going to create something to give you entertainment versus if you can be bored and you don't have the phone to go to, then it is, I think, very natural and organic to be like, well, let's get a potluck together and let's do this. So
yeah, I think a helpful distinction there is between entertainment and leisure. So the way that, like, certainly older societies would have understood leisure. That never meant like I'm going to sit around on my phone and just, or whatever, I'm just going to sit around in my house and sort of do nothing. Leisure was like a communal activity. It was something that, yeah, maybe you read, but like it was always productive. It was sort of learning or relaxing or just enjoying like the theater or something like that, which, even the theater, I guess, is a form of entertainment, but it certainly doesn't mean entertainment the way that we do today. We want to be entertained. Like we want to be titillated. Like, we just we need our neurons to fire in a certain way. And so and that's what the phones do for us, right? Like they sort of, and people don't appreciate enough how that like literally rewires your ability. I mean, to talk about this in terms of, something that's really relevant to Catholic men. One of the impetuses, I don't know how to say that. One of the reasons that the Postman Pledge was started was because this woman that started it realized, like, my kids aren't going to be able to appreciate and experience the sacraments in the same way that I do. I challenge people. This is definitely true for me. I really struggle to do an hour of contemplative prayer and adoration. I really struggle to stay focused on the Eucharist for long periods of time. Even in Mass, I have a difficult time staying focused on God. Now, I'm not saying that if you lived before the advent of modern technology, everyone was just like, an amazing, contemplative, you could just enter into contemplative prayer whenever you want. But it's worth appreciating how much our reliance on phones is really like a form of a handicap. Like it's really like a mental handicap because it has short-circuited your ability to do really basic things. And I find that extremely frustrating. In the way that, I feel like I just sort of was like physically rewired or mentally, re-engineered by these devices that, I wasn't old enough to choose for myself and didn't have the information about how they work. And before I could really develop a proper relationship with technology. And I think that a lot of people feel that way, but don't quite have words to, explain that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think people have started talking about it in terms of even looking at what we're watching on technology, going from, longer videos to now everything is shorts, right? Everything is TikTok, YouTube.
Except for podcasts.
Except for podcasts. But TikTok, you have YouTube Shorts. I think it's Instagram Reels.
Yeah.
Every social media has adopted some form of 7-second content.
Yeah.
And so people have kind of started bringing that up. But no, I think to your point in general of just how we think might not actually be how humans have thought, and also to your point of just curtailing that or putting in a little caveat. It's not like they were all, doing math while they were walking on the road, but they potentially could have had other ways of thinking through things that we have.
They probably
lost.
enjoyed they probably, to bring it back to something like gratitude, they probably were a lot more grateful for just like the wind or the sun or a good day than we are. I think I was 22 and I got, your annual Spotify report or whatever. Everyone always loves those. And I listened to like 99,000 minutes of music and 55,000 minutes of podcasts in a single year.
Yeah.
And I was doing the math on that. And this is ridiculous. I sort of began to realize like I always had an earbud in, like always, all the time. And so I stopped. I stopped doing that. I got rid of Spotify. I got rid of all my music. I just said like I don't want to be subservient to these things. It's actually hilarious that I'm on a podcast right now because I gave up podcasts for Lent. Because that was like the thing that I kept was like, I was probably still listening to like 2 or 3 hours of podcasts a day, which like I like a good podcast. Father Mike, he's great, everything. But yeah, I mean, we have to live in the real world. And by the real world, I mean, the world of the physical. Like if we are living in a digital world and we're constantly disembodied, it will be impossible for us to be good Catholic men. It'll be impossible for us to be men, first of all. Like men don't exist in the digital world. Men exist in the physical world. And it'll be impossible for you to be Catholic because Jesus is not, an apparition or something like that. Jesus is a real physical, it's probably not the right word, apparition. I mean, Jesus was not Jesus is not some sort of digital creation, he's not an idea. That's why we talked like earlier about ideologies. I'm sort of, I just don't have time necessarily for all of that. In the sense, like, I want to live in the real. Like, I don't want to live in the world of ideas. I'm very tired of ideas. I want to do practical things. I want to have kids. I want, like, all the things that are good. Like, think about all the things that are good in your life. They're all real things that like keep you away from all these other things. Like, so I'm a convert too, and like for me, just like the physicalness of the sacraments in Catholicism was like essential to my conversion. So like I don't think we appreciate that enough, and we're gonna lose sight of that the more and more that we move our entire world into this digital space. So yeah, I mean, I think we have to fight that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that might segue nicely into this. We're coming up on time. So
Okay.
on the last question that I ask everybody is, it's kind of besides the topic that we've discussed today, although it can be related to it.
No, yeah,
but
let's do it.
What is your like top recommendation for men in 2024? Again, It doesn't have to be related to what we talked about, but it definitely can be if that's top of mind for you. But what's your top recommendation?
Oh man, I'll give you something. I'll just like totally shoot from the hip here and give you something specific. Well, okay. One, stop watching porn if you're watching porn. Like, you just stop. Don't do it. We could talk about that for a whole hour. But actually, the one I wanted to say, because this really affected me in 2023. So I became Catholic on Easter, not last year, but the year before. And every year I've had a devotion to a different saint. So I chose St. Augustine as my confirmation saint. My first year I had like a specific devotion to him, still do. But, really that year I focused on him a lot. This past year I focused on St. Francis of Assisi, who I think St. Francis is probably the most important saint today. Like, for our current moment, I think Francis has like a ton to offer. I mean, St. Joseph is, incredibly important. I love St. Joseph. I go to St. Joseph's for daily mass here on the hill, on Capitol Hill. But I really think we have not appreciated St. Francis enough, which sometimes, especially conservative Catholics will sort of look at me and be like, he's like the liberal Catholic, he's the environmentalist or whatever. My recommendation is for you to read G.K. Chesterton's biography of St. Francis in 2024. It is by far the best thing I read this last year. And it's incredible. And I think it will really help people become better men too. Like, it will help you appreciate St. Francis a lot more, because Chesterton's favorite saint was St. Francis. It'll probably, it made me appreciate Pope Francis more. Not because of anything Pope Francis, did or said this year. I frankly try to not pay much attention to the Vatican, because I don't really think that Catholicism should become just Vatican watching, which sadly it sort of does for a lot of people, especially converts. So I try to be careful with that. But just the fact that he picked St. Francis as like his namesake, for the first pope to ever do that. I was like, wow, okay, if Pope Francis and G.K. Chesterton both really love Francis of Assisi, like, this guy's got something important going on. And I think the biography really, really can help you understand what that is, why it's so important. I really can't recommend highly enough that biography. So that would be my recommendation.
No, that's great. I know that Father Gregory Pine references that biography often. I haven't gotten the chance to read it, but I will take your recommendation on that. But in St. Francis's conversion story, apparently G.K. Chesterton has this line of, he careened throughout the city looking for the man who he didn't give alms to, and he never stopped careening since. And just like that little definition of St. Francis's life, I think is very...
he's so great. I mean, he just, you talk about like the epitome of what greatness is, like the kind of greatness that, I said earlier in the podcast, like the guys who are, pursuing greatness, even those, guys with like a Bronze Age mindset that everyone loves to sort of demonize, those guys, the reason I said I was hopeful for them is because like greatness is really amazing. Like when you actually figure out what it is, like St. Francis is like a truly, truly great man. And I just want people to see like what it actually looks like to pursue greatness. And I think Chesterton's biography lays it out really, really well. And then Francis's life just lays it out really well. One of my favorite stories about St. Francis is apparently he felt like a pang of lust, like he'd already become, he'd already started the order and everything. And he felt like a pang of lust for some woman, and so he just like threw himself into, I think it was like a snowbank or something. He just like, he just like, I think it was, or like a thorn bush. He just like ran into the thorn bush, and talk about living in the physical, man. I mean, like that's we really need a little bit more of St. Francis, and the people that don't get St. Francis, my whole family. This is another funny Protestant Catholic story. I had a great grandma named Mama Francis, and I've talked frequently with my mother about like about Mama Francis. I'm like, she didn't even know who she was named after, and he's so awesome. Francis, like I really think can help us a lot this year. So turn to him this year. Read the biography. Read it. I've been doing a devotional to him all year, just one of the little basic ones that you get at like a Catholic bookstore. And I have learned so much from his life and example. So, yeah. Matthew, one thing people totally look over with respect to, we were talking about the saints and some of this Bronze Age mindset stuff. One thing I brought out in that article that we were discussing earlier is how much I think Bronze Age mindset has been successful because it offers men something mimetic, which is to say, like, it offers them the opportunity to sort of mimic people, like body, like they're all obsessed with like memes and stuff, and people will want to make fun of that, but it actually makes a lot of sense. Like basically guys who don't have fathers a lot of times, I'm not saying everyone and this doesn't have a dad, but there's certainly a sort of dearth or absence of fathers. You want someone to look up to and model your behavior after, right? Just like I was talking about with technology, it's like not enough to just tell kids what to do or limit them or whatever. You need a man. If you're a man, you certainly need a man to sort of model that behavior for you. And, those guys are finding it in, someone like Andrew Tate or these other bodybuilders and stuff that like have obvious sort of virtues in terms of, their physique or whatever it may be, their discipline. It's like the saints like blow that away. Like if you actually begin to explore the lives of the saints, like people do not explore the lives of the saints. So you could actually read about the saints, read biographies of the saints. It will blow you away. Like I cannot begin to so I make a habit, like every third book I read, I try to read a biography of one of the saints. And it's just like, because it grounds you, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a role model. Like, and to be bold enough as like lay people, just as regular people, just to say, yeah, I want to be like the saints. I found out this year that so my parents named me, my middle name is Colby, which this is hilarious. So I didn't know I had a patron saint at all. Like I thought I had a confirmation saint, St. Augustine. I didn't know I was named after a saint. They certainly didn't mean to do this, but I've claimed this since I found this out. So my parents were park rangers, big hippies in Sequoia National Park. And they met this Catholic guy out there, who I didn't even know this guy was Catholic. I didn't know the guy that I was named after was Catholic my entire life, but some dude they worked with named Colby that they just thought was like the best. They really liked him, so they named me after him. And of course, he was named after Maximilian Kolbe. And so I've claimed Maximilian Kolbe. And like, just take Maximilian Kolbe, man. Maximilian Kolbe is like one of the greatest men of like ever, and certainly of the like 20th century. And it's just like how, Maximilian Kolbe is so much cooler than Andrew Tate that it's not even like comparable. Like, it's just in a totally different way. But it's like, yeah, like you want greatness, like you want real greatness. Like, look at Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe, like, truly great. And there's so many examples of men like that I think that we need to spend more time. I think we need to spend less time with ideas and like fighting, this idea or that idea. I think we need to spend more time in biography, spend more time in, the reality of people's lives, in the way they lived, and the example that they give us, because like that is the ultimate sort of foundation for men. I think especially is to have that example. Like I said, I lost my dad when I was young. He's a really great man, but I just didn't have that example as I grew up. So I like found that. I mean, and St. Joseph, of course, too. I guess the challenge with Joseph is that we miss so much of his. We don't hear from him as much. But even that can be something to follow in the sense of like being quiet and being in the background and just serving our families. So yeah, not just the Francis biography. Read all the saint biographies; they're really good. Read the biography of Constantine. You want to talk about a dude who's truly great? Oh my gosh! My wife's name is Helena, and if we ever have a son, I really want to name him Constantine.
There you go.
So we'll see. Anyhow, yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. And I think that gives a really practical place for people to start too, where it's like, look at your name. If you're named after a saint, learn about that saint. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, absolutely.
Do that today.
Well, Evan means John in Welsh. So like, I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I'm, beloved disciple should be a piece of cake. I can be like him. I mean, like, but it's a great point. I mean, when we talk about just, again, try to go full circle with this, is like, talk about gratitude. It's like, you have a name, like almost certainly your name means something good. Like, if not, it's a saint name. I mean, we live in a very Christian society in some ways still, at least culturally. So like all of our names as men, hearken, back to something great. It's like, lean into that. That's a really special thing. So, I mean, yeah, I think we have already, like, in our hand, like the seeds of renewal, like the ability to do something good, but we have to sort of realize what we already have. So I hope more men will do that and move to Hyattsville and be my dad friends. So yeah. Anyhow,
I was gonna say, this podcast has turned into like a commercial for Hyattsville.
Hey, dude. Hyattsville. I genuinely don't think there's a better place to be Catholic in the entire world. I would really challenge like anyone who comes on here to tell me there's a better place to be Catholic. It's not perfect, but man, it's good. Like, yeah, all of Northeast DC. I'm just quietly we're calling it New Rome. Catholic takeover. Don't tell anybody, but everyone just come and it'll be great. And if you're like Orthodox or Protestant, you should come too, and then we'll just convert you and it'll be awesome.
There you go. Open invitation. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching The Making of Man. If you liked that episode, please click here for more, and remember to like and subscribe.